and by the enablement of the Holy Spirit, so that the audience would be challenged, would be compelled to think, that our awareness would be expanded, our passions would be ignited, our convictions to stand for truth in dark days would become more reinforced and compelling than ever. So guide us now and bless every guest and their families, their needs. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
So again, we welcome everyone and Social Solutions today. Last week we had Dr. Wayne West of Jamaica. He is a lecturer, consultant, radiologist at the University of the West Indies Mona campus there in Jamaica. It was his first time to Social Solutions. It's his second time, and just declared he'll be a regular guest on the program. I can presume because he's my friend. So Dr. West, welcome to Social Solutions again.
Yeah, thank you very much again. Good morning.
Yes.
Did you hear me? You heard me clearly?
Okay. Just repeat again. Yes, please. Sorry.
Did you hear me clearly? I said good morning.
Okay, very good. Very good.
Right. Okay.
So good to have you.
All right.
And we also have Katina Anglin from the beautiful island of Grand Cayman. And we are so glad to have you again. This is your third or fourth time on Social Solutions, is it? Maybe your mic is muted.
Good morning.
Okay, good.
Good morning, Mr. Diamond. Good morning, Dr. West.
Good morning.
To you too. And to everyone down there in Anguilla. I think this is my fourth time on your show.
Yes. Just a word of warning: when people become guests on Social Solutions, they then take up resident status. So Katina is a witness, and Dr. West is in the process. Dr. West is also the chairman of, the president of Caribbean Cars, which is body that is trans-Caribbean, across the Caribbean, comprised of church leaders, doctors, attorneys at law, business people of all walks of life. Okay, so we have rectified that. Are we clear now on your end, Dr. West? Good, everybody? Okay,
I'm hearing you clear better now. I'm hearing you better now.
Very good. Very good. A technical glitch on my end. So Dr. West is the president of the Caribbean Cause, and he's also the president of the Jamaica Coalition for a Healthy Society. He wears his conviction on his sleeve. If you hear him for 30 seconds, you know where he stands. Compassionate and courageous. And so good to have you again, Dr. West.
Thank you very much.
Katina Anglin is the founder of Christian Association of Civics, right? Christian Civics Association. That's right.
The Christian Association for Civics.
Okay, right.
And Political Education.
Okay, very good. Coming in from the cold. This lady came from the cold, like the Apostle Paul, once on the other side, and now is a courageous, compelling advocate for truth. She doesn't know what it is to back down and to be intimidated. Balanced, compassionate, humble, and also with a clear sense that God's cause is worth standing for. And our guest from the UK, I'm going to allow Katina Anglin to introduce our diamond properly. I do say that we forgive him for not having been on Anguilla as yet, but that's going to change. But he has been a traveler, and he will be able to visit our country, I'm sure, at some point in time. So it's good to have you so much, and I'm going to now allow Katina Anglin to do the proper introduction.
Thank you, Pastor Gums. Now, Pastor Gumps, Dr. West is a step ahead of us in that Mr. Diamond has already been to Jamaica. And so we're coming up from behind on this. But please, allow me to introduce Mr. Diamond. Mr. Diamond specializes in the law of religious liberty, freedom of speech, and European law. He studied for his master's LLM at Magdalen College of Cambridge, and he won a scholarship to study international law at the Hague Academy of International Law in the Netherlands. Judge Lord Bennett has personally endorsed Mr. Diamond's academic writings. And I am reading this from his bio for Halcyon Temple. Sorry. My apologies. Mr. Diamond is also, I do apologize. Mr. Diamond is also appeared before the world's highest courts, including the chamber at the higher chamber of the European Union and also the European Court of Human Rights. Mr. Diamond is the UK's leading barrister in religious rights and freedoms. And one of the cases that I am most familiar with and appreciate most is the Ouida and the United Kingdom, which is about, which involves British Airways and an employee who refused to hide her cross on her necklace, refused to not express her right to express her right, who refused to hide her religious beliefs. It was very inspirational, a very inspirational case for me when I was studying law school, because I was also up against some stuff here in the Cayman Islands at the same time, and realizing how significant that it was to be able to express her beliefs through the wearing of her cross and exhibiting her cross played a tremendous role in me being able to carry on and stand firm in my religious beliefs as well. And so with that, I will allow Mr. Diamond to share some more with us about his legal background. Please, Mr. Diamond.
Well, I'm not quite sure what to say. Of course, you read my resume, which is trying to put my best foot forward. I leave out much of the other material. Well, I'm just a humble barrister. I got involved in this type of work very, very young. Started out.
I'm sorry, Mr. Diamond. Come a bit closer to your mic. You're very low.
Yeah. Maybe if I move this closer. I'm so sorry about that. Does that come over better?
Much, thank you.
Much, okay. I probably had it too far away. Didn't want to show you my lovely face so close. No, well, I started out very young. When I used to have hair in those days and looked dashingly handsome. Time has taken its toll. But I began working out with something called the keep.
Too soft.
Is it still too soft?
Yes. When you spoke, I heard clearly, but when you speak naturally, you tend to drop your voice.
Yeah, I'm not. I've got a MacBook here.
Maybe if the other panelists can mute your mics when you're not speaking, that might help.
All right.
I could always try my phone if that's. I could try my phone if that's better. I'll speak up. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me clearly now?
You clearly. Maybe Tina can.
I'm hearing you now. I'm hearing you.
Very
okay. Well, I'll just say I've been doing this type of work for many years. I initially started out with a group called the Keep Sunday Special Campaign. And that was in the late 1980s. And I was telling everybody I had hair in those days. That's and takes its toll on all of us. At the time, there was a very big battle over Sunday trade. The shops would open on Sunday. Are you still hearing me or not?
It comes and goes. I think you'll have to keep projected. Keep as close as possible.
I could try it on my mobile phone. If that comes through better. I don't know. That might be a way of doing it. Would you mind if I tried that?
Well, I heard you very well just a short while ago.
Yeah,
so if you keep speaking like that,
it must be connection.
Okay.
I'm
and Dr. West, again, try muting your mic. Again, let's see what happens. Okay, go ahead again, Mr. Diamond. You can continue.
Well, I'm also going to turn my phone on, and I'll see if it may be better if I try it through my phone than this unit. So you may get someone asking to join from a phone quite in a few moments. Let me just try. Can you? It's still difficult for you to hear me, is it?
Really?
Yeah, clearly it's the connection is not good. So let me join by the phone, and if that's better, I'll disconnect on this.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Let me
Okay.
He's muted.
Hmm?
He is muted.
Yeah. Unmute your mic, please, Mr. Diamond. Can you unmute your mic so we can see that you're speaking?
Ah, yes. Now,
okay.
Is that better? Is that coming over better?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Very good. It's coming out better.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's do it this way then, because
Okay.
this is. I'm just using my hand phone, so I apologise for all of this.
No problem at all. Technology.
Okay, where were we? What would you like? Well, I've probably taken too long, so you probably need to get on with your show now.
Okay. Yes. Just a question then. Given your background and you have inspired Katrina in Cayman and many other people, what drives you? What drives you to put your foot out in an area where many people just are unwilling, even many Christian attorneys are unwilling to venture? What drives you?
I think it's two factors, and I have to be honest. I sometimes wonder. The first one was a very unruly childhood. I was every mother's nightmare. And if I was told not to do something, I did it. And if I was told not to say something to a very important person, I said it. And then I think the second factor it's probably more typical. It's a sense of calling. But I have to say, I have found that quite difficult, because it's been very relentless. When you have a sort of a calling, it becomes a sort of relentless, and it actually, everyone says, oh, it's so wonderful, it's so easy, but it often isn't. Often you have to go ahead with a court case, as Katina is probably experiencing right now, against all the odds, without any funds coming in, with everybody attacking you. So it's that relentlessness, and I can't really explain it.
Well, you have expressed it well. You have expressed it well.
Okay.
And some things are better felt than told.
Yeah.
Okay, Katina?
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Diamond, and thank you for sharing with me that nugget about your childhood, because I can relate to that. My mother said, "Don't say a word," and I said, "But Mama," and then it all came out. And I thank you for expounding that, because it was it helped me to be able to identify better some of why I behaved the way I did when I was a child as well. Thank you. So, Mr. Diamond, you are familiar with the cases here in the Cayman Islands, and so for the benefit of the public, I will just do a walkthrough of those cases, and then I'd like to look at a couple of areas of law and parts of the judgments for you to expand on some for us with your legal expertise. So this path that we're on now exists only because two women in Cayman decided to return back to the Cayman Islands to engage in marriage. They returned from England, where there was the permission to be married in England, and on refusal by the deputy registrar here in Cayman, according to Dr. West. Can you mute your speaker, please?
Good.
On returning to Cayman and making the application, the deputy registrar, who is responsible for marriages here in Cayman, because we have a registrar of death, births, and marriages in one department, they refused the application because it did not meet the modality of law. Our marriage law stipulated that everyone is entitled to get married, but it has to be one man getting married to one woman. So it does not recognize polygamy. It does not recognize incestuous relationships, nor does it recognize same-sex marriages. And so they tendered a constitutional challenge, and they took the government to court. At the Court of First Instance, the Grand Court, before Chief Justice Anthony Smelly, he ruled that our Constitution did provide for same-sex marriage, and went ahead and amended the marriage law. The Cayman Islands government tendered an appeal, submitted an appeal to the Cayman Islands Court of Appeal. And in that ruling, the Court of Appeal overturned his judgment. But separating apart from that judgment and the question before, did our Constitution allow same-sex marriage? The judgment, the ruling was, no, it didn't. They went ahead and they made a declaration at the end of their judgment and said that the Cayman Islands was to pass legislation that was functionally equivalent to marriage, and to do so expediently. Ms. Day then went ahead and it is from that point that my challenge was launched, and I'll get back to that in just a minute. Ms. Day then went ahead and appealed to the Privy Council. She appealed the Court of Appeal ruling that overturned the Chief Justice's ruling. The Privy Council ruling was returned back the 14th of March this year, and it upheld the Court of Appeal ruling, which was that same-sex marriage was not permitted according to the Cayman Islands Constitution. And it's in that ruling, on that day, they also returned the judgment for the Bermuda case. Apologies. Now, going back to the declaration that they made in the Court of Appeal judgment, wherein they said that the Cayman Islands had to make legislation that was functionally equivalent for same-sex couples, the Legislative Assembly went ahead and drafted the Domestic Partnership Bill. That bill was read and debated in the Legislative Assembly. The bill didn't pass. It failed in the Legislative Assembly. There were elected members who asked for amendments to be done and another reading of the bill. So there was a legislative will to have another reading and to go through the legislative process with passing the bill into law if the Legislative Assembly voted that way. That bill failed. And the governor, after meeting with the premier, used Section 801 of the law of the Constitution to bring in the Domestic Partnership Bill, which was renamed at that time the Civil Partnership Act. On his announcement that this is what he intended to do, I sought legal aid, and began a judicial review process. In November of 2020, I was granted leave to judicial review. That was the first step in it. And then in December of 2021, the 2nd and 3rd of December 2021, the case was actually heard in the court, and that judgment just returned this past Monday. The Justice Williams in that case ruled that the governor was lawful in using Section 801 of the Constitution to pass the Civil Partnership Act into law. I will be appealing that case. I have another meeting coming up with my legal team this coming week to discuss the way forward, but I will be appealing that because it's a wrong, the judgment is wrong. The governor was wrong when he used Section 801 of the law. He had no power using Section 801 of the law to bring into force legislation in the Cayman Islands dealing with marriages and relationships, familial relationships. That is something that is an internal affair, and no declaration of the court can bind the Legislative Assembly into making or creating law. They are unfettered. They decide when, they decide what laws they're going to make, what laws they're going to amend, and the court can, as I said last time, they can scream it from the rooftop, but Parliament is supreme in when it chooses to make law. So there, and Mr. Diamond can expand on this as soon as he begins in just a moment about how the ECHR and the term of obligations and stuff can affect territories to which it was extended. And with that, I will ask Mr. Diamond if he would please explain for us how, my apologies, how the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, just for overview for persons to understand how that operates, and then the European Court of Human Rights and how you get your case into the European Court of Human Rights, and how the European Court of Human Rights decisions will affect judicial decisions in member states. Please, Mr. Diamond.
Well, I'm going to make a few general comments. I don't want to speak too much about Katina's case because that's obviously the Cayman Islands Constitution and it's got quite a lot of detail in it. But I'd like to reel back a bit to where this went wrong. Now, there is a ruling given by the Cayman Islands Court of Appeal, and this is where the problem arose, that it was necessary to comply with the European Convention, and it's another question whether the European Convention applies to someone as far away as the Cayman Islands with the same strength, but they gave a ruling that the European Convention requires the Cayman Islands to introduce a measure functionally, some form of civil partnership, functionally equivalent to marriage. And the problem with that is the European Court hasn't said that. That is the problem. So you actually have a ruling that is a wrong statement of the law. But that wasn't the fault of the judge, actually. It was the fault of the Attorney General because he didn't argue. He conceded that the Cayman Islands would be in breach if they didn't introduce functional equivalent to marriage. And I think to some extent the judge grabbed at that. Well, that's what they're agreeing to. They didn't, it was all done in concessions without argument. Now, the thing is that many European states have no provisions whatsoever for same-sex couples. And only about, of the 50 or so, I think there's 47 states in the Council of Europe, 47 European states in the Council of Europe, about 20 have same-sex marriage, the majority don't, and probably about 10 have no provisions whatsoever, and the rest have a conglomeration of different rights. They have a number of names for it in Europe. We call it civil solidarity pacts, civil unions, civil partnerships, each one a patchwork of rights. Now, there has been, I think it's true to say that the European Convention requires some recognition of same-sex partnerships, but it doesn't require functional equivalence to marriage. And so we've got a number of very strange phenomenon in the Cayman Islands. First, there's an inaccurate interpretation of European law because of the concessions by the Attorney General. Whether that was on purpose or whether that was by oversight, I don't know. But that's been where the problem began. So you've got a series of court judgments making this declaration. Now, secondly, these things are always political. Many countries want to introduce same-sex marriage, other countries don't. It's often a political question. It's clear that some recognition of same-sex unions is required. But at the current state of European law, and I'm not sure all European countries have done this, and many European countries say, like the Cayman Islands, marriage is between a man and a woman, so they can't go against their constitutions, their national courts. It's clear there have to be some recognition of rights, and that's normally interpreted to be core rights, such as inheritance. Inheritance rights would probably be necessary. Some form of maintenance rights if the partnership dissolved, and some form of next of kin rights. But what you've got in the Caymans is a misinterpretation of the law. You're reduced to a position where you're arguing over a name. I mean, that's all that's left in the Cayman Islands in a way. Is it a civil partnership or marriage? But they've both got exactly the same rights. So it doesn't really make any difference. You're going to be subject to a range of further litigations that the name violates dignity, or you're probably going to have a heterosexual couple who don't want to marry and want to have a civil partnership. You're wide open now for the sort of steamroller which has been taking place internationally on that level. So it probably does need a legal strategy. So that's the first problem, and that's a sort of a baseline problem, because you're slightly now caught like a rat in a calendar, if that makes sense. You're running round with all these erroneous decisions. And I think the second question is, which should have been challenged, is the applicability of the European Convention to the Cayman Islands, or the extent of it. It's all very well saying that the British government has international responsibility, and it does. And until the Cayman Islands wants or chooses independence, there is this very complex relationship with another country. And that's, again, possibly a decision for the Cayman Islands people. But what hasn't been analysed is the nature of the international responsibility.
The European Court hasn't ruled on this. They've got one decision that doesn't make logical sense. And there are a number of principles about the application of a regional agreement, i.e. a regional agreement in Europe with its rulings, applied to another region of the world, which is a long way away. And I'm not sure, if you take an international perspective, what the consensus is on same-sex unions or same-sex marriages. But I think what I would say of importance, I think obviously it's important. I think it's important we maintain our Christian traditions and the sanctity of marriage. I think it's important that the government devises a strategy as to why marriage is important. Don't just blab it. Very often there's no reason why. It just comes across as prejudicial. And at the same time, I think it has evolved to a stage that the core rights of same-sex unions need to be recognized, but they can still be distinct from marriage unions, particularly in relation to the procreation with children. So, but there's a lot of things that need to be worked out, and I'm not sure they are being worked out, if I could put it that way. But so I don't know if I've confused everybody more or helped you, but I've tried to give the problem. But the problem arose point blankly by the erroneous concessions by the Attorney General in the Cayman Islands Court of Appeal. And that's been the problem. And I think Bishop Sykes sought to intervene in the Privy Council to address that problem. He wasn't allowed to. So the Privy Council proceeded on the concessions, and they actually say that. It's agreed between the parties. So that's where we're at. And I think one of the other issues, maybe a bit more politically, if, let's say, Katina had a wonderful, functioning, well-resourced organization, or there was that kind of organization in the Caymans, you could have intervened at the Grand Court level way early on. It ran and ran through the Cayman Islands system with no voice for the Christian viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I've
Thank you.
helped. Yeah.
So, go ahead, Pastor Gums.
No, I thought that Dr. Roberts was about to say something. No?
Okay, I wasn't sure.
I can't say something. I would like to ask Paul Diamond, Mr. Diamond, Attorney Diamond. You know, I have been observing what has been happening in our courts in cases pertaining to the LGBTQ plus ideology. And there were cases in Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, in Belize, in Trinidad and Tobago. And in all those cases, the judges, at these, what do you call them, first incidents, I think that's the legal term, the judges made rulings, like in the Cayman Islands, which the Privy Council came out and said there's no right to marriage in the Constitution of the Cayman Island. But the Chief Justice of the Cayman Islands not only found the right, he found himself having the authority to implement that right. So the question is how do we control this sort of activity by judges? Now, it is true that the Privy Council has ruled that what the judge, the appeal court in the Cayman Island rejected it, but they implemented something else. The appeal court in Belize, although they said the judge, the then Chief Justice, also made changes to the Constitution, changing sex to sexual orientation, and he should not have done that, but they upheld the decision. So far, that decision has not gone beyond the appeal court in Belize. Now, the question I'm asking is, we have been fortunate, I call it fortunate, in that the Privy Council, the judges of the Privy Council have determined to take the Constitution as it is written, don't impose anything on it, and come to a judgment. Now, suppose they had followed what the Chief Justice, for example, or some of these judges in the Caribbean have done, we would have no alternative. Something would be imposed on us, and it would depend solely on the quote-unquote integrity of the judges, or whether the judges held to the integrity of the Constitution as written. I would like to ask you, Mr. Diamond, are there any suggestions as to how we can set structures in place that do not depend on the integrity of men, but rather on the integrity of systems? What system can we put in place so if our final court of appeal were to act the way the Chief Justice of Cayman and Belize act, there would be a system that the people would have recourse to? Is there any such thing, or what suggestions do you have?
Well, actually, that is a brilliant question, Wayne, and it's something that's as a lawyer, you're going to be very surprised, because I'm not a follower of law as a tool of politics, and that is what is taking place throughout the world. So, on this issue of particularly LGBT, there's a highly orchestrated movement on this. So you have cases in Jamaica, Bermuda, Cayman, Hong Kong. They've introduced, I think, certain laws in Hong Kong based on the European Convention, and Hong Kong has got no relationship to the European Convention. It's a member of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So firstly, there's a full-scale movement. And if you took some time to look at the lawyers representing both the government or these groups, all around the world, the same names will probably come up. And you'll find they're switching sides or whatever. So there is a legal campaign taking place. Secondly, Wayne, put your thing on silent. I think you've got the disturbance, Wayne. Secondly, so there's an international campaign. Now, you can ask yourself, why did the Attorney General of the Cayman Islands drop the ball? It's a pretty big ball he dropped. And, it may be part of a political strategy. That's the second point. The third point is law has become a tool of politics under the guise of human rights. And we're very, very close to human rights becoming a dirty word. All these words are so heavily used and so politicized. You can't speak against human rights, says some social media organization. Our interpretation of human rights is you can't speak against abortion, you can't speak against whatever, transgenderism, you can't speak against whatever, immigration, whatever the issue is, you understand? And they silence you. So this human rights term has become a political tool to silence. You're against human rights. You don't support same-sex marriage. You are against human rights. And that's how they've taken political debate into the legal debate. So that leads to the next stage. People get very desperate. They can't go to the courts because you've got your high court judges at first instance swinging away doing what they want. The media don't give you much space to put your arguments, and you're removed and cancelled, as they say. Mm-hmm. And I think and I'm afraid to say, I'm not sure I'm a great believer in systems. What is a system? A system is full of people, and people have to make decisions. And I think the only answer to this is robust political standing up, even against the judges. And if the judges want to enter politics, if they enter the fray, then there is a risk. And I think this human rights agenda is entering the fray. So the Cayman Islands Prime Minister needs to insist on the interpretation of Article 14 and not budge. Now, you've got a unique situation that your constitution allows the governor to legislate. I can't possibly at this stage comment on that because that's a constitutional settlement. And until the Cayman Islands becomes independent, they have to live to some extent. But the relationship between the courts and the lawmaker is extremely complex. And the court should be very hesitant before they cross the lawmaker. Before I just silence the question of systems, I think it's fair to say all our societies have become very post-Christian. And one of the attributes of a post-Christian society is the collapse of private ethics and standards. And the institutions do count. I mean, the fact you've got to be truthful, the fact if you lie to a court, there are penalties, those rules are still applicable, even though in many circumstances, I'm sure many individuals would like to lie or mislead the court, but the rules keep them in line. I think the way forward in any of these cases, I would be opposed to the removal of judges because the only thing that keeps a judge independent is the security of his tenure and the maintenance of his income. So I think those would have to be maintained. But I think there needs to be a move to some form of parliamentary sovereignty that the parliament can overrule a judicial decision by a vote in the House. Something of that nature needs to be done. So if you got your High Court judge going off on some living tree fantasy, the Jamaican or the Cayman Islands Parliament can pass a resolution very quickly saying it's of no effect. They note the judgment, and the absolute whip hand remains in the elected assemblies. But of course, I'll silence now, you may lose the majority in the elected assemblies at some point.
I thought of that. What I was thinking is that the sovereignty for all legislation must be in the parliament. So that must be instituted. But you see, once a judge makes a decision, it leads to a complex series of events. And I would also like to prevent a judge from making a decision which is absolutely, I would say, ridiculous. I would argue, for example, that the decision by the Chief Justice of the Cayman Islands that there was a right to same-sex marriage in the Cayman Constitution was a ridiculous decision, I mean, due respect. And of course, that position is upheld by the appeal court, which has gone down another route, which it probably should not have gone, and by the Privy Council. So the judgment was, in fact, ridiculous. But once such a judgment is made, it becomes very cumbersome to reverse it. And like I said, we have to protect our courts. We need courts because they are important. They prevent other less satisfactory ways of dealing with disputes. But when the court is showing itself to be compromised, just as happened when the king was taxing people and you had to establish the parliament, the Magna Carta came out of it. I am beginning to see that judges, some of our judges are moving in that direction, taking unto themselves powers that they don't have. They are to adjudicate law. They are looking to create law, not only create law, they're looking to modify constitutions, which is what seems to be happening. So I appreciate, and something that I thought about, of putting a clause in, something in place to make sure that fundamental changes to the constitution like that must come to the parliament. A judge cannot make that. And I think that probably is already there. But also, shouldn't we look at somehow or the other, and I'm treading some treading carefully here. Should we consider in some way penalizing judges who step so far beyond their boundaries? Is that too much? Tell me what you think about that.
Well, I can't say how much. I think you've raised a very interesting point, and I'm thinking on the hoof as you speak. But a couple of examples come to mind. You have the abortion debate in America, where provided 5 people out of 9 in the Supreme Court think X on abortion, that it's a constitutional right, and it's not in the American Constitution. They've created that right from the preamble of the Constitution, as they said. It doesn't matter if the Senate, the House of Representatives, the state legislature all say we don't want abortion anymore. Provided 5 people in the Supreme Court think X, everybody's got to live with it. And that's why you have this absurdity of selecting these judges in America, because it's absolutely important what their views are. And that's one extreme. We recently had a case in England, in United Kingdom, called Nicklinson, about someone wanting to kill himself, euthanasia. And the court, by a majority just about, said it's a matter for Parliament. But there'd been something like 15 bills in Parliament where Parliament has said, we don't want euthanasia, it's too dangerous, we don't want it. And it still went before our Supreme Court, and there was still a very fierce debate. We've got a right to decide what a human right is. And a lot of these issues like euthanasia or right to life, the judges of the court have no better ideas than the local Kingston taxi driver who's got lost in the south of the city. These are views which every citizen holds and has very complex views. So there is no doubt that judges are going too far. There's no doubt they're aggrandizing themselves and they're loving all this human rights legislation because they can play with it. You can decide X in one forum, Y in another forum. And it's clearly got problems for the rule of law because these human rights conventions are so broad. It's sort of, everyone's got the right to equality. Well, that sounds wonderful in a stump. But when it gets down to passing laws in your country, you've got to detail that right. And so it's got these very grand things that anybody can play with. There must be a mechanism of doing it. It does mean clipping the judiciary's authority, but I think you can do that. I think our parliaments are supreme, and they need to sort of set up a limited judicial review that can't address human rights, or something that's got to go before a committee of the House on human rights before it's sanctioned to go forward to a judge. There must be a tool, I'm somewhat split on all of this, because in the United Kingdom, historically, it was the judges that gave us freedom. They created habeas corpus. They prevented the government I'm talking in the 14th, 15th century. They required warrants before you could enter somebody's home. It was the judiciary who were a separate source of law, who stood up to very often autocratic kings. So it's all in the culture. So they have there's a balance between the two. But I think since we've moved to popular democracy, we have to say the parliament is where the final buck stops. And I think through these houses, clipping wings. And I think it's about time the Cayman Islands had some homegrown judges. I think part of the problem is they're flying in very brilliant minds from another part of the world. And they're not Cayman Islanders. They're not locally resourced. It's probably a wonderful little trip out there. But you know, it's about time you had some of your own homegrown judges appointed to the bench. I don't know what, you know, more of them or whatever.
I just wanted to add to that because prior to the ruling of the Privy Council, and I must say, you know, I spoke at a public meeting at a central area in Port of Spain, Trinidad, about three or 4 years ago, and I said these cases that are being, you know, this strategic litigation that was taking place in the Caribbean was really directed towards the Privy Council, because the LGBTQ people knew that the Privy Council would side with them. So these first incident judgments were really just to get to the Privy Council. The Privy Council would make a ruling which would affect all the Caribbean islands, and that would be the end of the matter. So I really vilify the Privy Council, and I am publicly saying, because I said so in public, that with the rulings coming out of the Cayman and Bermuda, I have to eat what Craw they say, or to eat my words, because the Privy Council has shown itself to be principled in the way it interprets the law. And in fact, our local judges for almost all those cases have shown themselves to be questionable. So you raise the question of the Cayman Islands having their own intellectual, their judges and so on, and that is true. And in the Caribbean, for the independent territories, we have a consideration of the Caribbean Court of Justice, which there's a lot of, you know, naturally, there's a lot of emotional issues around it. You want to, as they say, have your own court instead of going to the old Privy Council of the colonial master. But the fact is, in this matter of judicial activism, the Privy Council has shown itself to be the one that retained the principle of the primary status of the Constitution, and that people should not go around messing with constitutions simply because of their political and ideological considerations. So I have now shifted from being a supporter of the local Caribbean Court of Justice, I say all that to say, because of the conduct of our judges, to saying that we must think carefully about moving the Privy Council as our final source of a court of appeal, because our local judges, all of those who have tried cases pertaining to this LGBT issue, have shown that they are willing to allow their political position to influence their interpretation and the way in which they handle the Constitution. So I'm just saying all that to say that law is of itself importance, and it is more important than simply having judges from your area when those judges are not going to retain the principles of law and are going to impose their politics on the interpretation of law.
I think there's another thing I want to throw into the pot, and it's something that I did in England when I got going in about the turn of the century, 2001, etc. I started doing all these hate speech trials of preachers, and it took about 15 years to turn the tide. We argued the Christian viewpoint. You know, this is what Christians think. We want free speech. This is what Christians want. We want to be able to go to university, and Facebook, that in one case, you know, homosexuality is a sin. That was a case I did called Felix Nagoli. We fought all these cases. Now, the reason I'm saying that is that you've identified this strategic litigation. And as I said, I wouldn't be surprised if you looked at these legal teams. They're zigzagging around the world, from Hong Kong to Cayman or wherever, and there's a great strategy, and I am somewhat suspicious why the Attorney General dropped the ball so badly, if I could put it that way. And what there is no counter pressure. We live in a real world. There isn't this idealistic law. Law means 100 things to 100 people. And there are people listening to this show saying this is a very intelligent discussion, but I've never heard such stupid people because they've got the law wrong. And what is needed is your input as well into these cases. It's like we're like Muhammad Ali on the ropes against George Foreman. I mean, he's pounding into him for the first 4 rounds, and everybody's wondering, can he survive? And he did and won in the end. But if you remember that boxing. And there's no Christian intervention. There's nobody bringing a case. I mean, the Caymans are set up, as I said, for case after case now, and it's going to happen. You're on the ropes now. You're going to get 50 punches, and will you stand? But you need to counter it, and the judges need to be sitting there going, "I've got the LGBT on one side. I've got, the Marxist-Leninist group over there. I've got the fanatical Christians behind me. What am I going to do? It's a political question. I'm going to stick out of this one." And that's the there's a reality in it. And when we did these cases in England, we were whacked out of court for the first 4 years. And I can tell you personally, before the judges, I was lucky to be alive. I mean, they were brutal. But by the end, they were very polite to me, and it was a very important point of law. And this required a lot of mature consideration. And the results started turning, if I could put it that way. So I think that's part of the problem. I mean, I don't really know the Caribbean, but Britain was a post-Christian society. So it had the attributes of Christianity: uprightness, fair play, sensible laws, but it didn't have the vigor of it, if I could put it that way. The secular agenda was overwhelming. Now, your equation may be different in the Caribbean or different within different Caribbean countries, but I wouldn't assume you've got those roots. I've been around long enough that when a bit of push and shove comes, most people cave in to the job, the promotion, the threat of dismissal. I mean, I'm going to be blunt on it. So you need to somehow have your own strategic litigation or some form of political pressure that's coordinated, not just protesting. Because the other side, and they're doing it quite appropriately, are very organized and very strategic. And if they're cleverer than you, maybe they deserve to win. That makes sense.
Let me just ask one last question. Actually, the strategic legislation in the Caribbean is being coordinated by the Faculty of Law of the University of the West Indies through a group called URAP. They initiated the case in Belize, and I don't have evidence for it, but I have a feeling that they also initiated the case probably in Trinidad and Tobago as well. But I just want to find from your opinion, do you think the Privy Council has become a little bit more conservative? The rulings coming out of Cayman and Bermuda, they really surprise me. And if you think the Privy Council is becoming more conservative, why would that be happening?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what's happened. We're absolutely shocked in the UK because our Supreme Court is throwing out all the decisions that took place in the last 5 years, and they've turned into a very hard, strict judicial body. And I'm afraid to say there were a lot of political activists in the last few years in the Supreme Court, and they seem to be before us a perpetual battle between Baroness Hale, who was the great progressive, and Lord Sumption, who was the sort of, great traditionalist. And we used to watch, they both retired. They've appointed a new judge called Lord Reed. The people are much more narrower. So both on the UK Supreme Court and on the Privy Council, they're roping in all of this judicial review of policies and human rights. They've gone straight back to just applying the law. But so I think that is welcome. I ought to say it's made life for lawyers in the UK much more difficult because we were sort of assuming we could swan into court and argue some hopeless point. And now we're finding ourselves thrown out of court with a costs order. Okay, so you have a change of judge, but
what caused the new judges, you think, to be little more, seem to be more conservative than the previous people? Is it something they observed in the society, you think, that may have caused them to say, look, we got to back away from this progressive agenda and get back to the fundamentals? I'm thinking of all these trans things, for example, you know, in the sports, it's like a Pandora's box is being opened, and I'm wondering if the judges are beginning to see that you can't just create these arbitrary rights to satisfy desires without some significant consequence in the society.
I think it's got to, I mean, certainly this gentleman, Lord Reed, is now president of our Supreme Court, and I think probably in the Privy Council as well, and he's really roping back, and some of the new judges are more traditional. Why, you've asked? I would love to say the government are sensible, but governments are the most pathetic bodies in the world, and they, you know, we recently had some, I remember a few years ago, when Cameron first came into office, he had to appoint some judges to some international bodies, and he just chose effectively very radical progressive judges. You kind of thought, well, if the Conservative government's going to do that, what hope do we have, you know? So I would love to say the government's been wise in being, but I think there is a retreat back. I think people are getting very concerned at some of the issues now taking place in our society, and we do need some form of pushback. I think I'm not sure how to do that. How do we fight for our free speech? How can we stop Facebook and everyone just clicking everything off? You know, no matter how eminent you are, you've violated some code because they don't like your political views. That's what it amounts to. So I can't give you an answer, because I'd like to say the government were very clever in promoting Lord Reed, but I don't think they have the intelligence to do that. So I think it may just be a composition of the Privy Council for an era for the next 5 years. But again, that's something for you to bear in mind, that if you go to London for judgments, you whether it's in the West Indies or in London, at the end of the day, people change.
Well, you know, you've said something critical there, Mr. Diamond. We're going to go for a break, and when we come back, I would like you to maybe just answer a couple of questions, and also going to give Katina the opportunity to continue with some thoughts, some questions as well. But you spoke about the need for the presence of the right people in these critical areas, politics, and in particular here, the judiciary. In the Cayman Islands, when Justice Smelly made a ruling that legalized gay so-called marriage, it shocked the Cayman Islands. It made the LGBTQ activists happy, and the government was going to accept it. But a small group of people, including Katina Anglin and Bishop Nicholas Sykes, who is on Facebook viewing now, and some others, they were adamant that this was not going to go down like that. And also, Honourable Juliana Connolly, in government, she challenged her leader, and she told them, listen, you've got to oppose this. You have to challenge the Chief Justice Smelly, his ruling. And that's why the Court of Appeal was launched, came into being, and they overruled Justice Smelly. But that is because people in the community, like Katina Anglin and Bishop Sykes and Juliana O'Connor, who was on the inside as a politician, who strategically occupied so that she could represent truth, stood up, as Daniel did. So your point that you made earlier is so true, and this is what Dr. West, I believe, has been saying as well. We have to have the right people in these critical positions, and that passivism, that fatalistic attitude that believers have, that, you know, these are the last days, things are going to happen, there's nothing you can do, let's just sit down and wait for the rapture to come and let the world just burn and go to hell. That kind of fatalistic mentality is so crippling, and the devil loves it. He loves it when Christians just drop their guns without firing a bullet. So we are thankful for people like you. You are bringing that tenacity from childhood that some people may have liked to have whipped out of you. But God says, leave him. That's a warrior in training. And Katina has...
I don't know, I may be in training. I feel it's been ripped a bit too many times over the years, to be honest.
Okay, well, I want to ask you just two questions that you can respond to after we have this part. You made a good point that the ECHR does not mandate a functionally equivalent to marriage provision. The head of the FCDO was in Anguilla. I was in the meetings that were held with government and stakeholders. And he was stressing that the ECHR mandates that there's either gay so-called marriage or a functionally equivalent. And I pulled out the ruling and I said, it is not here. And I'm glad that somebody at your level is pointing that out, because this is what we have been hit over the head with in all of the British overseas territories. It's been repeated so long. We've had attorneys, local attorneys, who have recited, who have parroted these words, actually believe we have no choice because it is enshrined. And you are pointing out so well it is not so. Now, is common law, here's a question, is common law functionally equivalent to marriage? In that these individuals would like to see gay unions to be functionally equivalent to marriage. Is common law functionally equivalent to marriage? I would like you maybe to just address that when we come back. And I'm going to let Katina as well go on after that. So we'll be back just after this brief word from our sponsor.
Your chair's broken. Your toilet won't stop leaking. The grass needs cutting. The house needs a new coat of paint. Yeah. The kitchen needs renovating. Yeah. The tiles need updating. Yeah. You're running out of storage. Yeah. You're just about to start construction on your new house. Oh, yeah. Where do you go? Lakes Do It Best. Yeehaw! The sole representative of Do It Best products. Open Monday to Friday and Saturdays. Telephone 497-2628. Lakes Do It Best, where quality is at its best. Your chair's broken. Your toilet won't stop leaking. The grass needs cutting. The house needs a new coat of paint. Yeah. The kitchen needs renovating. Yeah. The tiles need updating. Yeah. You're running out of storage. Yeah. You're just about to start construction on your new house. Oh, yeah. Where do you go? Lakes Do It Best. Yeehaw! The sole representative of Do It Best products. Open Monday to Friday and Saturdays. Telephone 497-2628. Lakes Do It Best, where quality is at its best.
We are back with you here, Social Solutions. We're glad for our audience, those of you who are listening on Anguilla, across the Caribbean, and wherever you are joining from, the UK, the US, wherever. Thanks for being with us. We normally have call-ins, but because of the nature of the discussion this morning with our guests, we don't have the time for other space for call-ins. But if you want to ask questions, you can post your questions or your comments on Facebook. Those of you who are viewing on Facebook, or if you want to ask a question, you can text me or message me on WhatsApp, 1-264-476-1156. So 476-264. I'm sorry. 264-476-1156. And I'd be glad to ask the question that you're asking, and so that you can participate in the discussion. So Mr. Diamond, can you just maybe respond to that one, in that they are wanting gay unions to be functionally equivalent to marriage. Is common law marriage functionally equivalent to marriage? You're muted, Mr. Diamond. Can you unmute?
Sorry. I don't want to get too much involved in sort of technicalities of matrimonial law. I mean, one of the ironies is that they relied on the Oliari v. Italy case for that argument. But I'm slightly doing this from memory, but I remember looking at it, and they reviewed the European situation. And that's where they said there was some, I think 20 European states that had same-sex marriage. It's a few years ago. There were some 30 maybe not 30, lesser number of states that had some form of civil partnership of varying descriptions. And I think there were about 8 that had no recognition at all of civil partnerships, although I think that now is closing, and it is expected to, as I said, there has to be a core recognition of core rights of same-sex couples, but that doesn't mean same-sex marriage. So when these lawyers go around saying you've got no choice, it's a great tactic. And I've seen in my legal stuff some of the most scandalous performances by government, or assurances given to party A and a contrary assurance given to party B. We are living in that kind of that zone. Now, the common law, I'm not sure how to argue this without getting myself into very deep legal water. The common law has fundamental rights, but they're very historical, and the court should enforce them. And actually, they can be very detailed and more expansive than these human rights in these treaties. But the common law fundamental rights tend to be issues such as access to a court. They tend to be issues relating to the rule of law. They've covered such areas as destitution. They cover such areas as parental rights, the rights of parents to direct the teaching of their children. These are deemed common law fundamental rights. They're quite powerful. Common law marriage, I'm not even sure it's recognized as a legal concept. Judges created certain rights in a large number of injustices when a man would run off with a younger woman, but because the party hadn't been married, they had no home, they had no welfare payments for the woman. I don't think anything hinges on that. I think what the battle hinges on, and I think it is a difficult battle, I'm going to slightly widen it. What the battle slightly hinges on is, what do the Cayman Islanders want? You've got quite a lot in your favor. I remember when I had a look at your constitution, it seemed to have Christianity everywhere. We're a sort of Christian nation, we're this. You've at least expressed that. And I think we've got to face a reality, and I think we're going to have to face it. We've just had in Europe, well, I've done quite a few of these cases, so I don't think it's particularly new, but we've just had in Europe a Finnish MP who was prosecuted for a tweet. Mm-hmm. I, in fact, did my first case involved in my first case for a Christian minister who spoke on homosexuality, was prosecuted in 2005, right? So it's been going on for quite a long time in Europe, prosecuting Christians for hate speech and so forth. And I think there needs to be some form of intelligent response, because the Bible's going to become, it's amazing how the Bible's changed in my lifetime. I'm slightly digressing, but when I went into a court in 1997, when I first started doing these kind of religious cases, I always used to say to the minister, put your dog collar on, look like a reverend, pray in court at every opportunity. And the judges were so respectful of them, and you won every case. And they wouldn't allow a man of the cloth to be subjected to cross-examination. Now it's open season, and they're shifting the Christian belief from one of love and kindness to one of discrimination and stupidity almost. And we need to actually anticipate that. You may be 25 years behind Europe, but you need to see where the wind is blowing. And the Bible is a tough book. It's a tough book. So there's got to be some form of religious freedom, secular freedom balance, but they don't like what the Bible says. They don't like it when a Finnish MP tweets something, and it's going to build up in the Caymans. So what you need to do now is don't let it get to the stage that it got in many countries where the Christians are actually very often the persecuted minority. If I told you the amount of cases I've done of Christians, great people, dismissed because they had some conscience qualm or said something on Facebook that somebody didn't like them about, it could heat up quite a lot. And there's no real integration of all these themes. I hope I've confused you.
No, you have addressed it very well. And given us a sense as to what is the climate out there and the urgency for us to act, knowing what we are facing. Katina? Ms. Anglin? Yes.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let me start by apologizing to the viewers for the absence of Dame Sawyer, who unfortunately, it turns out she had to attend a funeral this morning and so was unable to actually join us here. And we do apologize, and she tenders her apologies as well. There will be another opportunity to have her on the show, I'm quite sure, and we will let the public know when that time comes. Now, Ms. Diamond spoke to an issue that really, I think, is the solution to all of this, and that's about Christians standing up. We've gone from being the brave voices to being beat down and intimidated, and a part of that is not only because of the judicial element of things and misunderstanding that, but I think also because a lot of what has been said within the church. We're not supposed to be a part of the political scheme, and there's a separation of church and state, and politics is bad and it's corrupt, and we're not supposed to be there, and we're just supposed to be seen but not heard. And as a matter of fact, I think we've got it now thanks to cancel culture, which we have allowed to progress. We're not even supposed to be seen, because they will eradicate us off of social media in a hurry. Now, if we've been falsely, if we've been persuaded to accept what is false, can we be re-educated to accept what is true? Mr. Diamond made a...
Can I just say very quickly, so that you can resume. Dr. West is leaving in 2 minutes. So,
Sure.
Dr. West, you have any closing word before you leave?
Yeah, I just wish to say that we Christians are to be salt and light everywhere and all the time, whatever is happening in the world. Christ didn't say, well, in the last days, all these things will be happening. So you're no longer to be salt and light and take the gospel to all the nations and make them disciples. So I think that we are to be salt and light everywhere. And it's something that we as Christian people across the Caribbean need to start acting on before it comes to our shore in a more fulsome kind of way. Good, thank you very much, and I have to leave. And good morning to everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. West. We certainly appreciate you taking time to be with us and for sharing as you have. So have a wonderful day. Okay, Katina, we're back to you. We're sorry about that.
Okay. So if they've been misled, can they be led back onto the right path about their civic duties, their role in society, how the church helps to guide the state? All of Western law is built on Judeo-Christian principles. The thou shalt not kill it's illegal to murder someone. Thou shalt not steal. Theft is a crime. And the list goes on. And I'll just use those two for an example because that helps to show us that there's a foundation in our laws that's called the Bible, because that's where you find these commandments, which are reissued to us in this world in a secular way through the judiciary, having been created by Parliament and handed to us as laws. We don't, as Christians, we don't get the right to back away from our civic duty. If we're salt and light, then we're flavorful and we're bright and we're present. And if we take a look at, and if you're aware of that and we start to seek knowledge, and even Solomon himself said, give me wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Mr. Diamond spoke earlier about Nicholson and Lamb and ECHR obligations and, the interplay with the territories and stuff. And Article 56 of the ECHR requires that implementation of the ECHR principles are done in accordance with local requirement. It says that the provision of the convention shall be applied in such territories with due regard, however, to local requirements. I believe that if we as citizens were aware of this, and then we went on to consider, well, what are our local requirements? We'd go to our Constitution. And Mr. Diamond spoke about the Constitution and having Christianity all written all throughout it. And for a long time, those who were against our Christian position said, oh, well, you can tear the front page off. It's called a preamble and you can throw it away. Except that in Section 1 of the Constitution itself, Section 1(2)(a), it says, that this part of the Constitution recognizes the distinct history, culture, and Christian values, and it goes on, of the Cayman Islands. So then if you're going to look at the legislative requirement in this issue, and the passage or amendment of laws, then turning to what would be Section 23 of the Constitution, which addresses the declarations of incompatibilities that can be issued by the judiciary. And there at Section 23, it says that if legislation is found to be incompatible with this part, the court must make a declaration recording that the legislation is incompatible with the relevant section or sections of the Bill of Rights and the nature of that incompatibility. It then goes on at subsection 3 to say, in the event of a declaration of incompatibility made on subsection 1, the legislature shall decide how to remedy that incompatibility, which brings us back then to the judgment he spoke about, Nicholson and Lamb, and Lady Hale's observation about declarations of incompatibility and stuff at paragraph 3 and paragraph 300, sorry. And in that she says, Parliament is then free to incompatibility either by a remedial order under Section 10 of the Human Rights Act 1998 in the Constitution, but we have that under Section 5 of our law, of our Constitution, of the Act, or more probably in the case of importance and sensitivity about an Act of Parliament, or to do nothing. It may do nothing either because it does not share our view that the present law is incompatible, or because as a sovereign parliament, it considers an incompatible law preferable to any alternative. So in making and creating law in Cayman and considering the European Convention on Human Rights, the margin of appreciation that must be applied down here in the Caribbean, in the Cayman Islands, has to be first, okay, so let's look at what our culture, what our local requirements are. Because the guys sitting up there in Strasbourg in those cold climates and a culture that is very diverse to our own, cannot impose their views on us in our culture and in our environment. They make recommendations. And there are, Mr. Diamond said it earlier, that there are requirements that need to be met, and we can't get around those requirements. But there are ways and hows of getting around meeting those requirements. You see that like in the French, in the Civil Covenant of France, in which two adults who are able to contract, they write out their Civil Covenant and they register it. So in the event that we're parting ways, I get 50% of the future value of the house at the time of our parting. I'll get the dog, you get the puppets. We write this into a contract and we register it. But it does not require that the Matrimonial Causes Act has to be invoked in order to divide property and sharing of pensions and so on and so forth, because two individuals have contracted this and their rights are then protected because of the registration of this document. So the formation and creation of legislation specifically to create something that's functionally equivalent to marriage is really not necessary in order for rights to be protected. And if I am wrong with that, Mr. Diamond can go ahead and he can correct me on that. But I'm looking at it from the Caymanian perspective and looking at the ECHR from this angle. Now, how then do we make sure that the Constitution is actually upheld and that any changes to the Constitution that needs to be made is made sensibly and in accordance with Section 1, our culture and our Christian values. Now, before we had a Constitution, we had the Word of God. That's how we lived. That's our foundation. That's a part of our culture. Did we always have homosexuality and same-sex relations and secret things going on? We did, but nobody was fighting to try to make it legislation and enforced against everybody else for acceptance. Today, this is the issue that we have, and Christians are afraid to deal with the issue that they have. They come out of the woodworks to make a big bang, and then they retreat back. And it really you can't maintain the effect that you want to have if you continue to retreat. As Christians in the Cayman Islands and in the Caribbean, we have to keep a constant presence. We have to seek the knowledge that is out there. The LGBT political ideology knows all of the laws. They are aware of what rights it is that they're entitled to, or that they even believe that they're entitled to, but they are aware of the Constitution. They are aware of how it's applied. They are aware of the positions that are available or coming online to be taken up. And so they groom their individuals. They get them educated. They teach them their ideology, their approach, their policies, their principles, their procedures, and so on. And they help to promote and elevate them into these public offices and key decision-making positions, while Christians sit back and say, foolishly, I must say, foolishly, that's not, I'm in this world, but I'm not of this world. Well, the truth of the matter is, you're in this world, and you have a role to play in this world. And I've seen instances where Christians chose to send their money away to support a cause in Canada, while the same cause was needed to be met in the Cayman Islands. And they didn't know how to manage themselves in that situation. We need to step up, stand up, and speak up, because the ideology and the judicial activism and stuff can only be curtailed, truthfully, by the presence of the people whose will binds the Legislative Assembly, who makes and amends the laws that the judiciary then goes on to read and try to interpret. And if the judiciary is aware of that the social and political pressures that the people themselves apply, and I'm not saying, push this to the point of corruption, but we have a role to play in maintaining our standard of living and maintaining our social environment and in upholding our constitution. That's not going to happen if we become absent from the scene.
You are making some so profound points here, Ms. Anguilla. I'm going to let Mr. Diamond respond to what you've said. We have a politician in the Caribbean who is listening, and that person is saying that Christians are too busy making money, and these monies are not even applied towards assisting these causes, which is where a lot of it falls apart. Because if you're going to litigate, Mr. Diamond said earlier that protests are not enough. To go and have placards on the street and have a rally of 1,000 or 10,000 people, that's good. But it has to go beyond that to litigation. Litigation costs money. And that's where it falls apart in many cases.
Right.
And where is the Christian muscle to help to move these things forward? And then online, we have Bishop Sykes. He's making some points as he follows the discussion. And he says, LGBTQ fundamentally misinterpret the Constitution because they have a view of rights which the Constitution does not have. And that is so true. Mr. Diamond, can you share your thoughts at this point?
Well, I mean, I think that's true. I mean, what I would say is just a few sort of general points. Christians earning money isn't bad, provided they have the second part. They use their money to, for other issues rather than self-satisfaction. But we need rich Christians. Secondly, I think Christians are very diffuse in their giving, and that's a problem. One of the problems we found, a lot of Christians supporting a school in Africa or Guyana, or it's very difficult to get Christians to give money to legal cases and issues of this nature, because it's slightly more sophisticated and it involves rich lawyers, or they think rich lawyers and judges. So there's a sort of barrier they have to cross on that. One of the problems I've actually found, because I used to be a fundraiser for many years, is that a lot of Christians actually say, well, I've given my 10% tithe. Now you want me to give 15, 20%. This is ridiculous. And I hope I'm not going to upset too many churchmen listening to this. But, I've done quite a lot of church wandering in my life, trying to find a suitable church. And many, they all wanted the new door put in, or the new disabled toilet put in that would cost vast sums. And there was a lot of navel looking in the church, and they didn't actually know what was happening in the parliament or what was happening to their fellow citizens. And they were raising quite large sums of money for a new kitchen. And, that could have actually funded a case. And I've spent most of my life. I mean, when I got involved in that British Airways case many yonks ago, it was great fun. I have to tell you. I'll give you my personal stories on a different occasion. But
I have to have you back for sure.
Yeah, but she was the check-in girl at Terminal 1. And I think she was on something like £18,000 a year. And she said, I want to wear my cross. She was employed by one of the largest companies in the world. I wouldn't be surprised if overall in this case, British Airways spent up to £1 million trying to stop people wearing the cross. Now, what can a person on £18,000 give? So I did most, I have to tell you, I did most of that work for free, right? Wow. However, you have to work very hard to set up some institution that can pay for people's costs. You can't ask people to lose their job, and if this new company policy comes in and you've all got to do something that Christians can't do, and that will happen in the Cayman Islands. They will introduce some transgender policy that everybody has to affirm. But then people are going to be on the spot. They're going to say, well, I can't lose my job. I've got a family, or I can't afford to fight this. So all these big talk, it's got to come down to practicalities. Can you fund their case? Can you support them if they lose their job? And it does require a bit of work. But I think one of the issues is to get, I think, Christians, as I said, we found this particularly in the UK, difficult area to raise money for. Either Christians felt exhausted by their church commitments, or they had, as I repeated myself, pet projects overseas. But to actually say you've got to do something in the Caymans and pay a lawyer to do something or set up an organization, the general response you get is that won't happen here. And I actually, people used to say to me when I was first doing this, oh, I'll do it when someone got arrested. And I said, well, someone's got arrested. Well, I'll do it then when someone gets killed. I actually had someone we argued was murdered, a gentleman called Harry Hammond, who was attacked, assaulted and died. It was about a year later, but the assault was connected to his death. And you just get these responses. It won't happen here. You're exaggerating. I went to a restaurant last night and it seemed normal. And we are also in a culture where the frog is being boiled very gently and sautéed. You're not thrown into the boiling water. It's heating up gradually and sort of, very small fractional differences over the years. So I don't know that, but I think, that's what you got to do. You got to stand up. You got to get organized. And I do seem to remember, maybe I shouldn't say this. I remember Katina had a terrible difficulty even finding a local lawyer to assist her. I mean, that's depressing to hear that. There wasn't anybody that would say, I'll do it, come what may.
Wow. Yeah, I think that we as pastors, because you have mentioned how over the years you've tried to find a church that had a three-dimensional perspective, understanding the need to feed the hungry in Africa, the orphans, those who are suffering, understanding the need to fund missions, but also to understand that missions is in politics. Christians have abandoned bioethics. So when you have stem cell research, when you have issues along those lines, there's no Christian voice hardly. Christians have abandoned the field of politics. And yet they vote for politicians who, in many cases, too often have their personal lives are messed up. And so therefore they are easily blackmailed. They vote for politicians who have policies and that are totally contrary to the word of God, and yet they fail to see that Christians need to enter politics in order to make a difference. Christians do not see the legal profession as a field to enter unless it is just for the fact that they enjoy it, and for some it has a sense of prestige. But they do not see it as a mission field where I go there to represent the cause of Christ. So when cases come up, they back away because those cases are controversial, and they don't have the backbone of a Paul Diamond, who has that spirit that says, I will be hit, but I will not quit. For them, the moment that their salaries are threatened, their reputations are threatened, they just turn a different direction. So the audience that's listening needs to see the need for us as believers, and we as pastors, to really challenge our congregations that being a Christian is three-dimensional. It is not one-dimensional. Christ goes to every sector of society. Salt penetrates everything, and light illumines everything. So we just have about 9 more minutes, and I want to give you both the opportunity to just speak to the audience at this point in time. What are some closing thoughts that you want to share?
I think the only thing I would say is, I mean, Katina's obviously got her appeal. She's got to get that organized. But I think what has struck me is that we're on the back foot and this whole thing from the word go. And what you need to do in the Cayman Islands, and if you haven't got the supporters, you'll lose, and you deserve to lose. Let's face reality. I've done many cases in the UK, if I can be blunt, and I'm not making any adverse comments. They just happen to be my opponents in the court. I was up against an LGBT group or an Islamic group, and they were wonderfully well funded, had teams of lawyers, and the Christians were sort of bumbling along with sort of, one photocopier down the road, and can we afford the taxi? So if the people of the Cayman Islands are serious, you need some strategic thinking. Whatever happens in the outcome in Katina's appeal, you are where you are, and you're going to be hit very hard within the next year. They're already working on the next case, and they're already well funded, and they're probably already meeting the government ministers for the next case. So when that next case comes along, where are you? And what are you going to do to counter that? And what about your next case to plan their next case? And so, you need some strategic thinking now. You cannot just walk down the road whistling, wait till you're whacked in the face, and then react. It's too late then. It's too late. I suspect this Bush case, with due respect, was well planned many years ago, and was well orchestrated many years ago, and there's others in the pipeline. Children, schools, access to something, and we are entering an era where I think the Bible is extremely threatening to people. I mean, it's got very strong words in the Bible, and people don't like it. Couple that with cancel culture. You need to plan your roadmap a bit. So that's what I'd urge on the Cayman Islands people. And what I heard about the Cayman Islands, and I you have to invite me out there, some millionaire, so I'm just dropping that in. What I heard in my naivety about the Cayman Islands is that there were a lot of quite wealthy people with lovely boats and lovely houses on the seafront who were purportedly committed Christians. Well, some of them you're going to have to rope in. You've got to get some strategic thinking on this. And some of the churches are going to have to commit. They're going to have to say, we're not going to do this, whatever, and not going to do that, but this is now a priority for us. But I think what I'm just urging, worse is to come, trust me. What are you going to do about it?
That speaks to Cayman, that speaks to Anguilla, every other British overseas territory. and every Caribbean nation where the audience is scattered across now, this is something, and a lot of us don't know our constitutions, a lot of us don't bother about the law, but the law at the end of the day affects every one of us very profoundly, as we see. Miss Anglin?
What Mr. Diamond said about the preparedness of the LGBT political ideology is very true. It's very real. It is, if we read the book about how America will overcome its fear of gays in the 1990s by Madsen, then you'll see that they have a strategy and they apply this strategy everywhere that they go, like clockwork. And it's successful because we aren't prepared. We don't know. We haven't sought that knowledge, and those of us who have it isn't dispersing it, and those of us who have dispersed it, it's falling on deaf ears, where you have the rebuttals such as what Mr. Diamond said, oh, I'll deal with it when somebody gets killed, right? So they are lining these cases up. If you look at how the Same-Sex Marriage Act actually became in the United Kingdom, you see that it was a series of cases that were brought before the court. When the church finally conceded the civil partnership, then they said, but hold on, this is marriage in all but a name. You're discriminating against us. And so you have to let us have this word marriage because you've given us civil partnership. It functions equivalent to marriage, and therefore to withhold marriage from us is discrimination. Here in the Cayman Islands, the Christian Association for Civics and Political Education was created, God-inspired, for that very purpose, to groom political leaders and put them into public office, so that we have leaders in there who understand how God intended society to work, and it works perfectly once the order of the Lord is followed. But we're not able to achieve this without the funding that's necessary. And the churches all, they appreciate the work that we do, but they don't see the importance of donating to it. And where it's going to lead us, inevitably, as Mr. Diamond pointed out, is that case is going to come, and we're going to be looking for the photocopier, because we're not even going to have the photocopier if we don't get prepared from now. They're lining the cases up because they need to do this. They have the framework. They have their legal teams. He spoke about them zigzagging across the world. It's just a matter of playing this thing out in their specified times, and it's going to happen and the only way that we're going to be able to keep the gate secure is if we are prepared. And so anyone who's interested, they can go to christian.ky and they can see some articles on there, what our mission is and what our values are and so on. And they can also donate to the Christian Association so that we can fulfill our mandate, our God-given mandate for civics and political activity here in the Cayman Islands, so that we can help to maintain a healthy society by upholding our constitution. Well,
you have spoken well to it, Sister Katina, and we have to see how wide it goes. Now, the confirmation hearing for the judge for the Supreme Court is center stage. Well,
the woman who couldn't define what a woman is.
Yeah, exactly. And she should have been
imagine.
What are you? Imagine. Are you a woman? They should have asked her that. Are you a woman? And let her answer that. I mean, I don't know how anyone can support someone like that but this is why.
But if she's sorry,
go ahead.
Excuse me, because that was highly offensive to me as a woman.
Yes.
Right? You're nominated as a Supreme Court judge. You don't know what a woman is. how are you going to protect my dignity?
Mm-hmm.
You don't know who I am. Even though you're supposed to be one of me, you're unable to even identify yourself. How are you going to protect me?
Yes.
And my rights and my values and my dignity? Because the next thing you'll be telling me is that the man who believes that he's a woman is a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I happen to know that he is not.
But then,
And you're going to...
but
Sorry?
how can you say that he is a woman when you don't even know what a woman is? It's just such a
Exactly.
convoluted way of thinking and reasoning. Yes.
And you don't have to be a biologist to know. And I think the woman who was at the pool watching Liam Thomas swim, and the youth said to her, he said, because she was saying that's not a woman in that pool, that's a man. And young man, cancel culture, woke. Are you a biologist? Can I ask you a question? Are you a biologist? And she said, are you serious? And he said, yeah. Are you a biologist? She said, I'm not a vet, but I know what a dog is.
Yeah.
And following right on the heels of that is, can you define a woman? But I'm not a biologist.
Yeah.
You're a woman saying, I don't know what a woman is.
It is just so preposterous. Yes, preposterous, and we have to see that. It goes to where a parent can have a child in school at the age of 12 who is taking hormones, given hormones by the school to change that person's, well, so that if it's a girl, she starts to grow facial hair. It affects her whole eyes. A boy, they can go through sex change, hormonal treatment without the parents' knowledge and consent. This is why this whole thing, and so for churches not to get involved, it's just a whole battlefield of distortion and abuse of fundamental rights and freedoms. And so I just want to thank you both. Obviously, a discussion as this needs to be a series because it's impossible to really address and exhaust it. But I want to thank you both. Dr. West has had to go, but we have had Paul Diamond, the leading barrister of law, Paul Diamond is the leading barrister on the law of religious liberty, including matters of both ethical and social conscience, a specialist in European human rights law, EU law, and certain aspects of public law.
I'll give you a $5 later, Philip, okay?
I'm sorry?
I'm going to give you a $5 later for that.
Okay, right.
Thank you for reading it, because I bumbled through it earlier, and I do apologize, Mr. Dan.
You are warming up. And then he has fought some of the most important and controversial cases in both the UK and Europe. So, Mr. Diamond, thanks so much for doing what you do for the kingdom at great cost to yourself. We pray that God would just show his favor. I know he has been, but that your needs would be met, that you would continue to be protected by angels in a time of where standing up as you do poses risk to your physical safety at times as well. So thank you so much, and for being a guest on our program today. Ms. Anglin, you were saying something?
Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to invite the public to visit Mr. Diamond's website at pauldiamond.com and see some of the wonderful work that he has been doing for religious freedoms and rights and family values. pauldiamond.com. And have a wander around his website, see where he's been, see what he's done, see what he is doing. And then perhaps we may become inspired even more to become like Paul Diamond. If the Paul of the past was not inspirational enough to us, then we have another Paul of the present.
Paul lives today. Paul lives today.
But that's a $5 to Katina as well, so I'm going to get pretty broke. Anybody else here, be quiet.
No, listen. And when you go to his website, donate because
donate. Yes,
give money.
Yes.
And you don't have to. If you don't have $1,000, give 100. Give the money that you would spend for cheeseburgers and hamburgers and for an iPhone. Just keep your old iPhone that is just a year old, and use that money to fund. I mean, we can do things if you're willing. And so we have Paul, who is still alive today. The spirit of Paul is in Paul Diamond. And we have Paula, who's AKA Katina Anglin, coming in from the rough. On the streets, needing drugs and homeless.
Glory.
And now she is an LLB postgraduate of law and founder of Christian Association for Civics, has led the fight in the Cayman Islands, brilliant, committed, fearless, and supported by grace. All of what these folks are doing, Miss Anglin, Mr. Diamond are doing, it needs our prayers, but it also needs our moral and financial support. And other cases across the Caribbean, wherever you are, where you see there's a stand, let your money do some talking as well. Support these causes. So thank everyone for being with us on our program today. We do appreciate it so much. So in England, my brother, enjoy the snow, enjoy the cold, while we down here enjoy the warmth of 80-degree temperatures and the sand and the sea and the smooth of the stuff.
Okay, I'm taking the £5 back.
Rubbing it in. Don't worry, Paul. I'm gonna get you over here.
Yes. And
Listen, I better get going, but it's been lovely being on the show.
Yes.
Blessings to everyone over there.
Blessings to you, Paul. God bless you.
Okay, then.
And to Dr. West as well. And
I'll sign out now, but bye.
Bye.
Okay, bye now, and God bless everyone.
God bless you too. Bye-bye.
Your chair's broken. Your toilet won't stop leaking. The grass needs cutting. The house needs a new coat of paint. The kitchen needs renovating.
Yeah.
The tiles need updating. You're running